You're about to hear a story about a man who is accused of killing 7 women in the span of 2 decades here on Long Island. The man accused of being the Gilgo Beach killer. I'm here with Newsday court reporter Grant Parpan, who's been covering this story for some time. So Grant, my first question to you is, who is Rex Heuermann?
Rex Heuermann was an architectural consultant prior to his arrest. He had an office in Manhattan, and he is the man who was ultimately charged in many of these killings. Melissa Barthelemy, Amberlynn Costello, Megan Waterman, Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Sandra Castilla, Jessica Taylor, and Valerie Mack. The way they connected him is, for a long time, investigators believed that the person who did this was likely someone who lived in Massapequa Park and worked in New York City. And the reason they believed that is because of phone calls. They had cell site data was pretty consistently coming up with phone calls being made in midtown Manhattan, as well as Massapequa Park. Police really were able to use those calls and say, okay, where did those calls come from? So one of the ways police also connected him was a description that someone who thought they might have seen him with one of the women described him as an ogre. He's a big guy, he's 6'4", well over 250 pounds. Some of the evidence that's come out in court has shown that he was a member of the Roslyn Rifle Club, which coincidentally owns a property right in that area where the remains were found in Manorville. One of the pieces of circumstantial evidence that prosecutors have put out there is just his search history, which shows a real appetite for grisly pornography, the kind of things that you would not find in most people's search histories.
Now we're going to talk about the evidence that was found during this investigation.
The biggest evidence that they had that was found on 6 of the 7 bodies was human hair, not belonging to the victims. Now that's the kind of evidence that really makes a homicide case. If you could find human hair, any kind of DNA that you can extract from somebody other than the victim.
I believe there was a belt buckle. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
The belt buckle was, at one point in the investigation, Suffolk police decided that they were gonna put out there a piece of evidence that they said might lead to the suspect.
A black leather belt embossed with the letters HM or WH was recovered during the initial stages of this investigation.
People now think maybe that belt buckle belonged to Heuermann's grandfather because his name was William Heuermann. Investigators will do that. They'll put a little bit of breadcrumbs out there to try to get the public's involvement, also to show the public that they're working on this case, that they're finding things, that they have evidence out there. But if it can help engage public interest in a case and maybe get some public involvement that helps lead to an arrest, they'll do that. And that's what the belt buckle really was.
It's Friday, July 14th. I'm Jasmine Anderson. We begin with a developing story. An arrest has been made in connection with the Gilgo Beach murders.
Rex Heuermann pled not guilty in the deaths of 3 women. Heuermann is now being held without bail.
Tell me about the arrest.
Once they developed him as a suspect, they put out a team of detectives who were trailing him. Unbeknownst to him, he was being watched, and they wanted to then get a direct DNA sample from him that they could then test. So in order to get a DNA sample, you'll often go through someone's garbage, things like that. You'll look for them to discard something, or in the case of Rex Heuermann, it was a pizza box. So he was leaving work one day, and investigators watched him dump a pizza box into a garbage can. And they quickly followed up behind him, scooped that out. There was crust within the box. That crust was tested and said to have DNA of the same person, or likely the same person whose hairs were found on the victims. And then after he was arrested, they then get a direct DNA sample from him, right? They do what's called a buccal swab to just further solidify that the DNA all matches.
They arrested him where?
It's July 13th, 2023. He's leaving his office, walks outside, is walking towards, I believe, the train station. Suddenly he's surrounded by a bunch of detectives who were there to arrest him and charge him with, at the time, 3 of the killings. He's since been charged with 7.
So now that he's arrested, police have access to his house. Police get warrants. They go into this house. What do they find in this house?
The initial search goes on for 12 days. They're digging in the backyard. They're pulling literally everything out of the house both times. They find things like magazine articles about the case.
About the Gilgo Beach killings?
About the killings, right? They find Newsday articles. There's evidence in his search history, too, that he was always looking at the case. They pull out of his house many devices, and the biggest piece of evidence that people are really fascinated with was something found on one of his devices in the house, and it was wiped. It was deleted. So think about if you're writing something in a Word document and then you delete it, you think it's gone forever. And what they're able to do is restore this document. What prosecutors have said it is a planning document to commit serial killings. And this document was made sometime between the killings of Valerie Mack and Jessica Taylor.
What's on that Word document?
Potential dump sites. There's references to Mill Road in Manorville, off which Valerie Mack's remains would end up being found. A lot of it is trying to avoid being detected. Materials that you could buy that might help clean the crime scene better.
What are prosecutors calling this document?
They call it the HK planning document, or they call it his manifesto. There's references in there to books that have been written by FBI profilers about certain cases that seem to be references to ways other suspected serial killers have been caught.
Rex Heuermann is being held at the Suffolk County Correctional Facility in Riverhead. Grant, what have you heard about his behavior there? What has he been doing?
Not a lot of people get to see Rex Heuermann. I mean, this is a high-profile inmate. This is not somebody who's kept in the general population. So he's somebody who doesn't have a lot of interaction with other people. I know over the years he's had some visits. Now, him and his wife have gotten divorced since he's been incarcerated, or they're at least going through a divorce. From what I understand, he is obsessed with his case and his defense. He accesses a computer and he studies the evidence. So I think that's how he spends a lot of his time. But this is not a guy who has a lot of interaction with other people, and that's really for his own protection. Jail is no joke. You know, if another inmate were to harm him, that's something that might be a boost for that person within the jail population. You know, they can't have any kind of disaster like that happen. They need to bring this case to a trial. So he's protected and isolated largely from everyone else.
Ladies and gentlemen, Rex Heuermann is a demon that walks among us, a predator that ruined families.
Now I want to talk about what it's like when Rex enters the courtroom. You were there the first time he faced a judge, correct?
Yeah.
Tell me about that moment.
The first time he faced a judge. Now, his name came out that morning, so people were able to search him, but people hadn't yet seen him in person. And I think a lot of people were really struck by his size when he came in the room. You know, he's not a small man.
What was it like when you walked into the courtroom?
Every time he's brought in, really, people are so focused on, you know, what is he wearing? What's his demeanor? Where do his eyes gaze as he's in the courtroom? And I've watched him maintain a lot of eye contact with the audience. He maintained eye contact with me at one point for several seconds as he walked in, you know, and I'm sitting right behind him. I think he's just kind of really taking it all in.
What was the reaction from the gallery or the audience there when he first spoke?
I believe he said something at his very first appearance. If I'm not mistaken, he might have just acknowledged the judge. But then some time had passed. It was earlier this year, and he was being arraigned for the killing of Valerie Mack. Typically, an attorney is going to enter that plea and say, my client pleads not guilty. And in this case, Heuermann spoke himself and said, I believe the line was, I had absolutely nothing to do with killing these women. And you just heard an audible gasp in the audience. Everybody was like, wow, you know, to hear him talk.
So you mentioned that you and Rex locked eyes at one point. What was that like?
He was walking in. He's being brought in. I believe it was from the lunch break. And I'm watching him, of course, because I want to try to give some color to the reader. What's he wearing? That sort of thing. And I noticed that he seems to be looking at me, and I'm looking at him. And it was almost like I don't want to look away. I'll look in his eye, whatever. And it was just an uncomfortable couple of seconds of him looking at me. It wasn't something that made me terribly uncomfortable. It was just like, oh, wow, he seems to be looking at me and really soaking it all in, when I'm so used to people just looking the other way.
So this case is still ongoing. So Grant, where does this stand now, and where is it heading?
So the hearings regarding the DNA evidence should wrap up in the coming weeks. Then a judge will make a decision about whether or not that DNA evidence and testimony regarding it will be permissible at trial. There's also a pending motion to have the cases separated. The defense team wants to have the cases done, 3 of them first, and then the other 4 individually after that. But then you move towards jury selection and have a trial. Nobody has given any indication yet of when that would be. Could it be at the end of 2025? Possibly. More likely, I would say, in 2026.
What's the amount of prison time that he's looking at?
He's looking at life times 7. If he's convicted, he's going to go to jail for the rest of his life. He's facing first-degree murder charges with some of these victims. 3 of the Gilgo 4, because they were done within a 2-year period, they've been charged as serial killings. Even when you factor in the second-degree murder charges, you're still looking at possible life sentences. Given his age, there is no way, if he's convicted of any of these killings, I can't see, even if some sort of plea was offered, he would never be able to get out of jail. The only way that's happening is if he's not convicted.
Grant Parpan, Newsday court reporter, thank you so much for sharing the backstory on this.
Thanks.